Do you think the internet can't be shut down? That it's a free, chaotic network with no center and no owner? What if I told you that there are already people with the keys to the root, and they can shut down the entire world? Submarine cables, root servers, data centers, each of these points has an owner. And if all the levers come together in one set of hands, who will be able to protect us? This issue is not science fiction. It is a reality that you cannot afford to ignore. When you open your browser and visit any website, you feel a sense of absolute freedom. The internet seems like a boundless and chaotic universe with no boundaries, no control center, and no single owner. It exists as a kind of digital nature, wild, spontaneous, uncontrollable. This feeling has been around since the 1990s, when the internet was still associated with anarchy, cyberpunk, and the romance of network resistance. Even today, despite digital monopolization, many continue to believe in this legend. But this is an illusion. In reality, the internet is much more structured, centralized, and vulnerable than it seems at first glance. Behind the screen of distributed networks, neutral protocols, and decentralized technologies lie very real management structures, access rules, controlled entry points, and critical physical infrastructure. We live with the belief that the internet cannot be shut down because it is supposedly organized as a distributed network with no single center, and a failure at one point does not affect the entire system. This is true, in theory, but in reality, every system has its weak spots. And in the case of the internet, there is not just one such vulnerability. There are dozens. What's more, they are controlled by specific organizations, states, and even corporations. For most users, the internet is a browser, a messenger, a streaming service. Everything else is hidden beneath the surface. How does DNS work? Who decides which domains will exist and which will not? Who manages global routing tables? Who can change them? And who can stop them from being updated? Even major outages, which occur from time to time, give only a faint idea of the scale of dependence. Remember the Amazon Web Services outage that brought down thousands of websites? Or the problems at Meta that left the world without access to Instagram and WhatsApp for several hours? Each of these cases is a wake-up call. It shows how fragile our belief is that no one can turn off the internet. Another part of the myth is the belief in anonymity and freedom. We think that the internet is a place where we can say anything, search for anything, and no one will restrict us. This is also a myth. Algorithms, filters, shadow bans, local bans. These are not just technical barriers, but tools for controlling behavior and thinking. But the most frightening aspect is not content filtering, but the very structure of the internet. It is designed in such a way that, if desired or necessary, someone can turn off large parts of the network. Not the entire internet, but regionally, segmentally, temporarily, and the consequences of this can be catastrophic. Power over the internet is not just power over information. It is power over the economy, communications, even consciousness. Shutting down the internet means paralyzing a country, its businesses, its army, its community. This is no longer science fiction, but a strategy that is being discussed at the level of national security. That is why it is so important to understand that the internet is not a free element. It is an engineering marvel consisting of servers, cables, protocols, and rules written and controlled by people. And these people have names, organizations, goals, and sometimes political interests. Let's start with who writes these rules. Who tells us what an IP is, what a domain is, how the web should work, and who has the right to change it? If you ask a random person who controls the internet, the answer will almost always be vague. No one, everyone, governments, corporations. These words indicate how vague the image of real power is in the digital world. In fact, the internet has a very specific governance architecture, complex but not infinitely confusing. And this architecture has its own peaks, nodes, and keys. Let's start with ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. This is a non-profit organization based in Los Angeles that controls the distribution of domain names, IP addresses, and the functioning of DNS systems, the phone book of the Internet. If ICANN decides to revoke a domain from a website, that website will disappear from view. Even if the server continues to operate, no one will be able to find it at its usual address. And if changes are made to the so-called root zone, the stability of the global network can be affected. ICANN has long been under the direct influence of the United States. Formally, the organization gained independence in 2016. However, its structure is still such that most of the levers are concentrated in the hands of American jurisdictions and representatives of the largest IT corporations. ICANN has no army, no police, but it has the power to exclude from the network. The next important structure is the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force. This is a group of engineers who develop and publish standards for the Internet. Every protocol, every data transfer rule is the result of their work. They do not make laws, but they create what the Internet cannot physically exist without. Their documents are called RFCs, or Requests for Comments, and they are the Bible of the online world. U3C, World Wide Web Consortium, is responsible for the development of web technologies. This is where decisions are made about what features browsers will support, how forms will work, and what elements are allowed in HTML. Although W3C cannot turn off the Internet, its decisions shape the digital everyday life of billions of people. There is also the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, a UN agency that regulates global telecommunications standards. It is not as actively involved in the day-to-day life of the Internet, but its regulations can influence the work of providers and networks through international agreements. Each of these organizations operates formally independently, but in reality, there is a dense network of influence between them. For example, many ICANN members are also members of the IETF and work for Google, Amazon, and Cisco. This network density creates not only transparency, but also secrecy. Outsiders have no real chance of influencing decisions, especially if they are not insiders. And then there are government agencies, the NSA, DARPA, and the U.S. Communications Commission. They are not mentioned in the Internet's charter, but they are actively involved in shaping it. The HTTPS protocol, for example, was developed with the participation of special services. Many encryption standards are tested in their laboratories, and they have direct access to routes, gateways, and traffic exchange points. Thus, instead of mythical decentralization, we see a clear pyramid. At the top are a small number of organizations that are formally open but de facto closed to themselves. They have the power to redefine protocols, change routes, and shut down addresses. This does not mean that they will do so without reason. but the very possibility is alarming, especially considering that decisions are made behind closed doors, without widespread publicity, and almost always without the involvement of ordinary users. The system works, and so far, it works stably. But as soon as one of these nodes comes under external pressure, or a failure occurs internally, everything can change. After all, behind every digital process, there is a human factor. Imagine a lock for which there are only a few keys. If they are lost or damaged, access will be lost. In the world of the Internet, this lock is the DNS root server system, and the keys are literally cryptographic tokens held by a limited number of trusted individuals. This is not a metaphor. It is a reality that has been recognized and described in open documents. The root zone is the foundation of the entire Internet naming system. When you enter a website address in your browser, your request goes through the DNS hierarchy, from local to regional, and then to one of the root servers. These servers know where to look for the top-level domain, .org, .ru. If they are disabled, the entire chain is broken. There are 13 root servers, but don't rush to think that there are only 13 machines. These are 13 logical points, each of which can be backed up by hundreds of copies scattered around the world using Anycast technology. But the logic remains the same. Changing the behavior of these servers means changing the behavior of the entire Internet. Behind each of these servers are operators, organizations and companies such as VeriSign, NASA, the U.S. Department of Defense, and universities. They are required to adhere to strict protocols and ensure security, updates, and stability. And here we come to the keys. In 2010, the DNSSEC system was introduced, a digital signature for DNS records. A root encryption key, called a key signing key, KSK, was created for it to function. It is stored on special HSM hardware security module devices in secure facilities. Only a limited group of people, known as Internet keykeepers, have access to them. Their names are known. They are representatives of different countries, engineers, cryptographers. Twice a year, they gather in data centers for a key regeneration ceremony. Everything is done according to protocol, with biometric authentication, observers, and video recording. It's like a scene from a spy film, only it's not a movie. It really happens. Theoretically, if such keys are sabotaged or hacked, it is possible to create an alternative version of the Internet, replace DNS responses, redirect traffic, and cause massive disruptions. Therefore, physical security is not just empty words. ICANN's data centers are equipped with cameras, secure storage rooms, and even have an emergency evacuation plan for the keys in case of disaster. But what is most worrying is the vulnerability of this node. One failure, one mistake, one infection in this chain, and millions of users around the world will be unable to access the websites they need. Everything is based on trust and transparency. But if this balance is disrupted, we will not be able to verify anything ourselves. The scenario of root servers being shut down or replaced has long been considered a threat to national security in the United States, China, and Russia. That is why many countries are creating their own alternative DNS systems, backup roots, and national domains. This is an attempt to ensure themselves against centralized control. However, in a global network connected by a common architecture, complete independence is an illusion. Even if you create an alternative route, it will not be recognized by most networks. This means you will remain in an information ghetto. Root keys are not a button to turn off the internet, but they are the closest thing to it that exists in reality. And as long as they are in the hands of a limited circle of people, controlled by the United States and a number of allies, the question of who can turn off the internet is not so rhetorical. Everything we call the cloud is actually cables, physical, thick, protected by a layer of steel and plastic, running along the bottom of oceans, rivers, and seas. They connect continents, providing more than 95% of global internet traffic, and they are one of the most vulnerable points in the global network. Submarine cables are the arteries of the digital world. They are hundreds of thousands of kilometers long. They run along the bottom of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, connecting Europe with America, America with Asia, and Asia with Australia. Some sections run through seas, straits, and close to the coast. This is where risk concentration points, or choke points, arise. There are several such critical areas in the world: the English Channel, southern Italy, the coast of Egypt, the Strait of Malacca, and the area around Japan. Dozens of cables converge in these places. Damage at one point can affect communications between entire regions. Such cases have already occurred. For example, in 2008, damage to a cable in the Mediterranean Sea led to the internet being down in Egypt, India, and other countries for a whole day. But even more important is who owns these cables. Most of them are privately owned. The owners include telecommunications giants, consortia of providers, and, increasingly, corporations such as Google, Facebook, and Amazon. They build their own lines between data centers, bypassing national providers. This gives them not only speed, but also independence. However, every cable passes through coastal stations. These are places where the cable comes ashore and connects to the terrestrial infrastructure. This is where it can be intercepted, damaged, or disconnected. This is where states can establish control. For example, in the United States, there are laws that require operators to provide access to cables to special services. Another important element is traffic exchange points, IXPs. These are physical nodes where providers and companies exchange data. If you are in Europe and open a website in the United States, your traffic will most likely go through one of these nodes. If such a node is overloaded, damaged, or under control, data can be intercepted or delayed. Cables can be more than just cut. They can be tapped. There are special submarines that can connect to fiber-optic lines and read information. During the Cold War, the U.S. ran Operation Ivy Bells, which involved tapping Soviet submarine cables in the Sea of Okhotsk. Today, such methods are used not only by states, but also by corporate structures. Commercial companies have emerged offering secure infrastructure, which translates as "we control who transmits data and how." Thus, submarine cables are not just a man-made system. They are a strategic resource. Whoever controls the cable controls the information. And that means politics, business, and the military. The myth of the Internet's immateriality is shattered by reality. It begins and ends in ports, cables, stations, and nodes. And if you strike at them, you can shut down regions, disrupt financial systems, interrupt army communications, and isolate entire countries. This is no longer theory. This is infrastructure warfare, waged silently, without missiles, but with no less effect. When we talk about Internet control, the first things that come to mind are states, special services, and international organizations. But in reality, real power in the digital world is increasingly in the hands of private corporations. And while they used to play only a supporting role, today they own not just platforms, they control the infrastructure itself. The so-called Big Five are Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, and Apple. These companies do not just develop products and applications, they are creating a parallel reality, a digital ecosystem that encompasses everything from servers and data centers to submarine cables and satellite communications. Amazon Web Services, for example, powers more than 30% of all cloud services worldwide. Netflix, NASA, government websites, all of these can be hosted in a single Amazon data center. If it goes down, thousands of services will disappear. And not just entertainment services, but strategic ones as well. Google owns the world's largest search, email, and cloud storage infrastructure. But in addition, the company has its own data centers around the world, including areas with autonomous power supply, cooling, and fault-tolerant systems. They are like fortresses, closed, autonomous, and controlled. Microsoft Azure serves millions of customers, including government agencies. This means that government data may physically reside in the data centers of a private company. And that means it is under their control. Meta, Facebook, has built its digital empire on communications. Messenger, Instagram, WhatsApp, all of these are united by a common logic that dictates who can communicate with whom and how. During the outage in 2021, the world lost its usual channels of communication for hours. Not because of hackers, but because of an internal routing error. Apple, despite its smaller share of the cloud market, plays a role in creating a closed ecosystem, from devices to services. At the same time, the company actively promotes the idea of privacy, even though it owns the keys to its devices and can remotely influence their behavior. They have one thing in common. They don't just provide services. They own channels, protocols, and platforms. Their infrastructure is global, stable, and almost inaccessible to external control. They can change the rules, restrict access, delete data, all without trial, public discussion, or accountability. In addition, these companies are increasingly involved in geopolitics. Google is laying underwater cables connecting the United States and Asia. Amazon is collaborating with the Pentagon. Microsoft provides cybersecurity for Western alliances. This is no longer just business. This is digital diplomacy. This is precisely why national clouds, platforms, and messengers are being created in China, Iran, and Russia. It is an attempt to break free from dependence. But as long as users remain in Western ecosystems en masse, the influence of the Big Five will remain. It is a paradox. The Internet was conceived as a system without a center. But today, this center is taking shape in the form of corporate hubs. And if someone at Google or Amazon decides to cut off access to the server, it will be almost like turning off the Internet. Because the key to it is in their hands. The Internet is not just a technology. It is an arena for geopolitical struggle. In the 21st century, control over information has become equivalent to control over territory. And just as powers fought for colonies in the past, today they are fighting for digital space. For a long time, the United States was the main force behind the architecture of the Internet. Protocols, DNS, servers, everything was developed and hosted within the sphere of American influence. Even ICANN, despite its formal independence, remained under the influence of American structures. This caused concern among other countries, especially those seeking digital sovereignty. China is the United States' main rival in this space. It has created the so-called Golden Shield, a system of censorship, filtering, and control. There is no Google, YouTube, or Facebook in China. Instead, it has its own platforms, servers, and routes. But most importantly, it has its own DNS and internal internet equivalent. China can physically disconnect the country from the global internet while maintaining the functionality of its internal networks. Russia has followed a similar path. In recent years, a project called Sovereign RUNET has been unfolding, with the possibility of isolating and redirecting traffic within the country. Alternative routes, internal equivalents of services, and traffic control systems are being created. This is being done not only for security reasons, but also to enable digital autonomy. Europe is trying to strike a balance. On the one hand, it is integrated into Western infrastructure. On the other hand, it is promoting digital sovereignty, GDPR, and personal data protection. But without its own platforms and data centers, Europe remains dependent on the United States and its corporate giants. Meanwhile, developing countries are becoming a battleground. Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia are laying cables, building data centers, and implementing platforms. This is not just investment. It is laying the foundations for future digital control. Moreover, the Internet has become a tool of sanctions policy. The US can shut down services, restrict access to cloud platforms, and delete applications. This has already happened to a number of countries, including Iran, Syria, and Venezuela. Disconnection is a new weapon. The term splinternet has emerged to describe the division of the Internet into fragments based on political or geographical criteria. Where there used to be a single network, there are now islands with their own rules. And the further we go, the more these fragments will diverge. Against this backdrop, alliances play a special role. The Five Eyes, an intelligence alliance between the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, have long used the Internet as a surveillance tool. Their infrastructure is embedded in global cables, exchange nodes, and clouds. In response, China is developing its own digital Silk Road. Russia is strengthening its cooperation with Iran, India, and the BRICS countries. Thus, the Internet is no longer just a means of communication. It has become a geopolitical object. It is being laid like gas pipelines. Wars are being fought over it, albeit without guns. And while the question of who controls the Internet used to sound philosophical, today it has become quite concrete. The digital world is no longer one, and the further we go, the more it will reflect the interests of states rather than the principles of openness. This is a new reality that we need to get used to. Whereas in the past, the possibility of shutting down the Internet seemed theoretical, today it is a documented practice. In many countries, the Internet has been shut down completely or partially for political, military, or social reasons. These precedents show that yes, the Internet can be shut down. And it has already been done. In 2011, at the height of the Arab Spring, Egypt literally shut down the Internet across the entire country. Almost all connections disappeared overnight. Providers were ordered by the authorities to stop working, routes were removed from the global BGP table, and Egypt was plunged into digital silence. This was the first case of such a large-scale and technically clean shutdown. Later, something similar happened in Iran in 2019. During protests against rising petrol prices, the Iranian authorities shut down external communication channels. the internet only worked within the country. People could not access international websites or send messages abroad. The protest was silenced, literally. In Kazakhstan in 2022, the internet was shut down in stages, first in certain regions, then across the whole country. The reason was mass protests and unrest. This was done to control the flow of information and coordinate the actions of the security forces. In Myanmar, after the military coup, the internet was shut down every night. This became part of a strategy to intimidate and suppress dissent. People did not know what would happen in the morning, and this fear became a tool of power. These cases are united not only by the fact of the shutdown, they show how easy it is to tear a country out of the digital space, and how this changes reality. The economy freezes, communications collapse, fear paralyzes. Technically, such shutdowns occur through BGP, a routing protocol. The state can force providers to delete routes and close traffic exchange points. It is possible to cut a country off from the network like a node. This does not require explosions or attacks, only an order and a server command. In addition, the internet does not have to be shut down completely, but only jammed. For example, bandwidth can be reduced, access to certain websites can be restricted, and download speeds can be slowed down. Such measures have been used in Turkey, Venezuela, and India. Their effect is less noticeable but just as destructive. Even in democratic countries, there are attempts to impose restrictions. In France, the authorities discussed the possibility of temporarily blocking Telegram in the event of a threat of mass unrest. In the United States, companies can block accounts, hosting, and access to resources by court order, which is also a form of disconnection. What is frightening is how easy it is to do. It all depends on political will and technological infrastructure. Where it is centralized, disconnection is a matter of hours. Many countries have begun to develop plans in case of disconnection. They are building internal DNS, creating copies of key websites, and duplicating routes. But as long as the entire system depends on international infrastructure, security remains conditional. Every precedent is not just a coincidence. It is a reminder that the internet is not air. It can be shut down, and the more we depend on it, the harder the blow. So, we have come to the main question. Is it possible, in theory and in practice, to shut down the internet? The answer is yes, but with reservations. The internet is not a single button. It is a complex system of thousands of nodes, routes, physical channels, and logical protocols. It cannot be turned off entirely with a single click, but it can be shut down in parts, regionally, temporarily, thematically, and under certain conditions, globally. The first scenario is political. If a state wants to isolate itself, it can do so. China, Iran, and Russia are already implementing digital isolation technologies. They can lock traffic within the country, block external channels, and create a closed ecosystem. This requires resources, but it is technically possible. The second scenario is technological. Large-scale routing failures, BGP breakdowns, key server failures, DNS malfunctions. If a chain reaction occurs, millions of websites and services will become unavailable. Failures have already happened. Configuration errors at Amazon, Facebook, and Cloudflare led to cascading outages. This is not a global shutdown, but it is a wake-up call. The third scenario is a cyber attack. Imagine a virus that infects root DNS servers or routing systems, or a DDoS attack on key traffic exchange points. Some of these attacks have already happened. For example, the attack on DIN in 2016 took down dozens of services, including Twitter, Reddit, and Netflix. The fourth scenario involves climate. A geomagnetic storm, solar flare, or infrastructure destruction. Scientists predict that a powerful solar storm could destroy satellites, damage cables, and knock out transformers. This is a low-probability event, but one with high destructive potential. The fifth scenario is corporate. If Amazon, Google, and Microsoft simultaneously shut down their data centers, a significant portion of services would disappear, including banking, government, and medical services. This could happen due to a technical error or a political decision. And given that these corporations cooperate with governments, such a scenario does not seem far-fetched. The sixth scenario is human. Internal sabotage, administrator error, unauthorized access to equipment. The more complex the system, the higher the probability of failure. And the Internet today is one of the most complex systems ever created by humankind. The seventh scenario is content-based shutdown. Already today, it is possible to block a website, a topic, or a word. An entire phenomenon can be erased from the network. This is not a technical shutdown, but a functional one. You remain on the Internet, but without the information you need. This is a new generation of censorship. Therefore, the question is not whether it is possible to shut down the Internet. It is who can do it, and why. In today's world, it is a tool of power. Those who have access to root keys, routes, protocols, cables, and data centers can do more than just control the flow of information. They can control reality. The Internet began as an anarchic dream, a network without a center, where everyone is equal. But it has turned into a system with centers of power, vulnerabilities, and levers of control. It gave us freedom, but it also created dependencies. And that means it gave those at the helm the ability to flip the switch. And if that switch is ever used, it will no longer seem impossible.